Welcome back to the Bionicle Inspiration Series, the show where we take mocks from the Bionicle community and aim to inspire you. We're going to take a deep dive into these Bionicle mocks, relate it back to a specific theme, and see what sort of stuff we can learn about that theme and about these mocks, and maybe give you some ideas for your own custom LEGO creations. Today, our specific theme is Kaiju. So what's a Kaiju, you might ask? Well, I'm going to head over to Google and get the dictionary definition here. Kaiju is a Japanese word meaning strange creature. In English, it has come to mean monster or giant monster, referring to creatures of a large size seen in movies from Asia. Many kaiju movies are made in Japan. So, yeah, we're going to just essentially talk about big old scary monsters and specifically maybe kind of relate it back to like Godzilla and a few other different things at times in this episode here. So, yeah, a lot that we can learn from. And this has been quite a popular theme in the past for Biss, but also just for Bionicle fans, with movies like Godzilla or Pacific Rim and stuff like that. Bionicle fans specifically have always had a decent interest in it. Not all of them, of course, but when those have come out, there's been a bit of a spike in the community of interest in that sort of stuff for sure. So wanted to touch on that because it is something that people certainly can rally around, and hey, it's pretty cool to look at some big giant monsters and stuff. So without further ado, let's take a look at some kaiju, well, I guess just more specifically big giant monsters. This is our first one here, and it is a very cool one. It is Voiceless Dragon by King Knack. So a lot to love about this one here. I specifically love how he's used a lot of kind of part spamming on this, specifically on like the neck and the torso. I'll focus on the neck specifically because using a whole bunch of those different like kind of, I don't know, tooth pieces of sorts there, it looks almost like a sort of like rib cage or some sort of skeletal design. But at the same time, it kind of just works at creating this sort of cylindrical shape that can kind of form this longer neck of this, more sort of dragon-esque mock here. And I think that actually works really well in two fronts because, if you can get pieces that naturally form that cylindrical shape, good job, it works well, it looks cool. But at the same time, it does have that skeleton vibe, so it does kind of give it this more, I don't know, horrific, scarier look. It looks like it's a bone dragon of sorts. I think that's kind of the only part of this mock that looks that way, but regardless, I like that it gives it this sort of more sinister, scary feeling, which, well, it certainly makes sense for big, giant, scary monsters that would probably kill you. I also quite enjoy, like I said, there's some part spamming on the torso here, using some of those larger tooth pieces that, well, specifically came from the Invasion from Below Bionicle sets, well, the Hero Factory sets specifically, Construction sets, you might say, which we'll talk about a little later in this episode, because obviously that theme is very kaiju-inspired. But yeah, repeating them on the torso there I think works really well. There's something about it that looks almost like scales on some sort of reptile or something like that, or just kind of continues the aesthetic of the neck as well. So there's just kind of a nice sense of unity between the different elements of this mock. In my opinion, mocks always really shine when there's sort of that consistency between everything. If your textures are similar or sort of there's like repeated patterns in that sense, everything kind of just flows nicely together in unison. So stuff like that I think can really go a long way. And yeah, it's as simple as just sort of repeating pieces across a mock. I think personally it works really well. I also like the inclusion of a whole bunch of red throughout this mock. It sort of almost looks like veins or some sort of, I don't know, internal structure or something. There's just these like flex tubes and other sort of very thin strands of red that just sort of flow throughout this mock, and it looks great. It kind of looks like, I don't know, magma or guts or something kind of just dancing around inside the mock, or you could almost see it sort of like glowing or, sort of pulsing or something, perhaps, if you were to look at this creature, and, maybe it's charging an attack and suddenly it all lights up or something like that. I know, it's cool. It starts to kind of paint a picture of how this thing might, I don't know, breathe fire or attack or fight, so I like that a lot, and I specifically like that it all sort of congregates at the sort of front of the torso there, and what would probably be, I don't know, the sac that the fire forms and comes out of its mouth or something. I don't know specifically what that is, but it does look really cool. I also quite enjoy the fact that it's sort of a little bit more exposed at the front, kind of like leans into like a lot of mythological stories with like dragons and stuff, where it's like, oh, there's the one scale that's loose, and if you can, get your weapon into that and stab it, you'll be able to kill this impenetrable creature sort of thing. So I like the fact that it kind of looks like an exposed point that, could be used to someone's advantage in combat. I think it's clever, it's fun, Some other stuff I like about this is just in general the head design. It's very, very nice with the little whiskers and all the different spikes and things. And just the general shaping of it looks just magnificent, just really sort of visually impressive. And also there's a whole bunch of different pieces on here that are quite large that sort of help form just the bulk of this mark. You know, obviously because we're talking about kaijus here, we're talking about very large, big creatures, and that's obviously reflected in the scale of these marks. So it's nice to see that he can kind of get away with using pieces like those Viscerac body pieces on the sort of front legs there, or even some of those larger black wheel pieces also sort of at the front of the torso there. You know, that sort of stuff can naturally be quite large and can be a little bit more difficult to use on your sort of standard toa and stuff like that. So it's nice to see those pieces being played with when you can really increase the scale here. So it's pretty cool. But yeah, in general, I think it's a fantastic looking mock. Really nice work. Let's move on to the next mock. It's by Balumnomnom, otherwise known as Matt Goldberg, and this is Crystalmite. So I think this guy's kind of fun. It kind of reminds me of one of the specific kaiju from Pacific Rim. I think it was the second movie where it sort of had like wings and stuff. And I don't know, this is just a creature with wings. That's probably a bit of a stretch, but it kind of reminds me of that to some degree. And specifically since we're talking about kaiju, it's maybe not that much of a stretch. But I think it's a great inclusion to include those insectoid wings here on this creature, because I think the aesthetic fits it pretty well, you know? The slightly older sets, those insectoid sets, but I know I've got a bunch of those wing pieces from bulk stuff. I never actually bought any insectoid sets. I think maybe I bought like a really, really tiny, like $5 set sort of thing, but yeah, I've just found those wings in like bulk lots and stuff in the past, so hey, maybe you're like me and you've just got one or two lying around, so no reason you couldn't put them in a mock. And if not, I'm sure they're cheap on Bricklink. I don't know, I didn't look it up. I'm not sure, maybe they're really expensive. But hey, it's a cool piece, and I think it works really well here. And it kind of continues that crystal aesthetic. And that's something I quite like about this one here, is that Matt's obviously included a lot of this, you know, trans blue throughout this, whether it's a sort of lighter trans blue or the darker on the wings there. And it really does kind of look like, you know, a crystal aesthetic of sorts. You know, in my head, I kind of go like, okay, if you're making a sort of, you know, this is called Crystalmite. It's, you know, to me, I get the sense that it's this kaiju that sort of emerged from the ground, and you know, it has this sort of crystalline aesthetic because it's, I don't know, that's how those creatures lived and grew. They have a close relationship with crystals or whatever, you know, whatever it is. But I kind of have that aesthetic, and actually we saw it in the last episode we did on dinosaurs with the sort of Crystal King dinosaur, where there was a very sort of specific sort of attention to that sort of like jagged, rigid look of a crystal that you could find. One that's more like natural and straight from the earth, not ones that have been like cut and refined at like a jewelry store specifically. And part of me goes, oh yeah, you need to include like specific like crystal pieces from Lego sets, or you need to have that kind of like jagged aesthetic. But ironically, just having that color in such a large amount, it kind of does just reflect the color and look of a crystal. So it's amazing how far you can go with a color scheme and what that can communicate, you know? This would obviously possibly work on like a tower of water at the same time, because it kind of could look like water. But just by saying, oh, this guy's name's Crystalmite, and, you know, you see this aesthetic here, I think it works really well. And also kind of just the general shape of the Hero Factory armor pieces here kind of look like crystals to a degree. So yeah, it's interesting to note how well that works. Yeah, he's done a good job with that. Again, he's used some of these Invasion from Below pieces, specifically that headpiece and those larger black claw pieces once again, like I said before. But I think those sets, I really enjoyed the Invasion from Below wave of Hero Factory sets. And the pieces in them were perfect for kaiju because it kind of was a kaiju theme essentially, right? So by all means, if you have some lying around or you're looking to buy some sets, look into those Invasion from Below sets if you're looking to build kaiju specifically, because the pieces are perfect for them, specifically those head pieces. They just look fantastic. So yeah, great to see all that being used here to represent a bit more of a, you know, a kaiju mock, you know. I also like that this is quite a small mock, specifically when you compare it to the last one we saw. And, you know, in the description here, Matt was even saying, you know, it's like these are a curious crystallized giant insect known to occasionally terrorize cities. So, like, you know, size-wise, doesn't look like it could terrorize a city. It's just, it could fit in the palm of your hand sort of thing. But just because you're building a kaiju doesn't mean it needs to actually be a massive mock. You can kind of scale it down of sorts. It still looks like a kaiju, but yeah, it's a smaller looking mock. It still works, you know? If you want to build a kaiju, doesn't mean you have to build it big if you don't have the pieces to accommodate that, or you just don't want to build a massive mock, you know? So yeah, think about like scale, and heck, you could even build like a little sort of micro scale, little city underneath this, and then you can kind of demonstrate that scale with it. You know, maybe even use some of those little nano figures that sometimes are used as like trophies for minifigures in like system sets and stuff. And those could be the people, and you build little brick built city and skyscrapers and stuff. It could work. So I don't know. Have a think about scale. You don't have to build it big to represent that it is actually big. You can just play around with it in that sense. It's a way to look at it, way to think about it. The final thing I like about this guy is the butt. The back of it there. It looks like it kind of has like a little egg sac, or it could even be like what are they called? Like the glow bugs, the fireflies, how they have the glowy butts. It could be something like that. Part of me thinks it's a little bit more creepy, and that's like an egg sac or something, which I don't know. I like the sort of uniqueness of that, you could say. So yeah, and it kind of gives you this sense that, I don't know, maybe these things like burrow into stuff and lay their eggs and do stuff. I don't know, weird, creepy stuff. But I think it works. I think it works really well. So I like that inclusion there. It's a nice little fun detail. Let's move over to the next mock. This is a submitted mock, and it's by Ryan Decker. And this is called Kaiju Breach Guardian and Jaeger Breach Jumper. So it's kind of just a overall sort of trope with kaiju stuff, but also, specifically relating it back to Pacific Rim. The idea of like Jaeger versus kaiju, big giant mech robots fighting these, giant beasts. It's a fun and cool concept, and it looks really cool. So it's nice to see a mock here that is specifically representing that idea of a giant robot versus this giant monster. So that on its own, I think, is fantastic. And kind of just jumping off of that, I also really like the idea that the Jaeger, the giant sort of robot here, is very heavily system, whereas the kaiju is very heavily CCBS, constructions, hero factory pieces, all that sort of stuff. I think it really separates the two, like specifically in the movie Pacific Rim, the kaiju are from another, I think it was another world or another dimension. It's been a while since I've watched Pacific Rim, but they're not of Earth. And, the fact that they have very separate textures and they're almost from sort of separate things because, your system and your Bionicle, they're kind of living in different worlds to a degree. I like that. Just the inclusion of the specific textures there really sort of differentiates these two. And also the color scheme as well. The kaiju is almost exclusively black, whereas this Jaeger here is, dark red, yellow, and a little bit of gray thrown in there as well. So it's a nice sort of distinction between the two, and it really gives you this sense that, they're enemies, good guy versus bad guy, or just monster versus robot, however you want to look at it. They're going to fight each other. It's going to be this battle, So it's nice to see that sort of visual storytelling there where just the specific types of pieces and the color scheme really separate these two and sort of, showcase them as enemies in that sense. So I love that. I really, really think that's subtle stuff, but it goes a long way. This is certainly a more sort of like stereotypical looking kaiju as well, I think. I think some of these specific tropes, like the sort of very large, sort of pronounced head like that, and even just kind of like the longer fingers and kind of just the general shape of it too, looking a little bit more kind of like monster-like, almost a little bit sort of more dinosaur-ish of sorts, I guess you could say, is certainly something to maybe lean into if you're looking to build a kaiju. Really go over the top. If you want to give them massive long fingers or a giant tail or a really weird pronounced head that is almost sort of shark-like to a degree, do it because it works. And it's you sort of can have that liberty, I guess, when you're looking at kaiju for sure. So yeah, definitely lean into that if that's what you're looking to do and you're looking to build a kaiju. I also like with the head design here, the inclusion of the kind of like trap piece that came with the final wave of Bionicle G2. They were used as little sort of like pets almost with a lot of the different sets, but they kind of looked like a bit of a bear trap, and they were almost sort of used like that with like Umarak the Hunter and a few other different sets. I love the inclusion of using that as the specific teeth here on this kaiju. So I don't know, it works well, and it does look like a very sort of menacing looking, jaw, mouth, or array of teeth of sorts. So yeah, I think that's been really, really well done, and it's a great part use there for sure. Also in some of these photos, this kaiju kind of has like, I want to say like two forms, but that's maybe not quite the right word. But in some of them, he's sort of standing up a little bit more, and it has a very specific silhouette and look to it. And there's others where he's sort of leaning down a little bit more and is kind of in more of like, I guess you could say like a battle pose, really. And look, whether that was like a deliberate thing of, it can sort of stand upright more and fight, or it can lean down and, really use its head and its claws and its tails as weapons more or something. Whether that's a deliberate choice or it's just, in these photos I just had him leaning down a bit more. It wasn't really intended for that. I still think it looks cool, it kind of reminds me of in Amazing Spider-Man 2, when very end of the movie, Spider-Man's fighting Rhino. And, Rhino's standing up and he's doing all sorts of stuff, but then it sort of like leans down and actually starts to run like it's an actual Rhino. I don't know, little like subtle shifts that can do very different things in combat, perhaps. Maybe it's like that. Maybe I'm sort of stretching things a little bit here, but personally I think it looks cool. And regardless, I think it's a nice sort of reminder that when you're taking pictures of your mocks, don't forget to pose them and put them in crazier, more unique positions, because it can really capture people's imaginations and really show off all the different features of the mock. So, yeah. And also it's got lots of tails. It works. Like I said, go over the top, add multiple different things onto it, because you can get away with it with a kaiju. The next mock now is by VelociJACKtor, and this is called Hexagon Destroyer versus Shin Gahdok. So this was built for the Bio Cup, and this is like a sort of, I can't remember the specific theme, but essentially what he's done is he's taken the original Exotoa and Gahdok and Gahdok set and made it into a sort of fun, unique twist. So making it be like a jaeger versus a kaiju here. And sort of flipping it on its head and recreating it in a fun and unique way, which straight up I think is a fantastic idea and is actually really well executed in my opinion. So, I don't know, Gahdok and Gahdok kind of have that awesome sort of Godzilla look to them naturally. So I think it's actually, not as far of a stretch when you think about it. But yeah, great to see Gahdok here reimagined in a more sort of like, dinosaur kaiju aesthetic here. So let's quickly talk about the Exotoa that they are fighting here, because it's a fun little design, a little bit more sort of like skinny and minimal. But I actually kind of like the fact that they've done that, because it does give it this real sort of David and Goliath aesthetic of the tiny little guy versus the colossal titan, and the tiny little guy still manages to win because they use their creativity and their smarts to win the day. So I like just sort of the visual storytelling of that, of big guy versus small guy. It's the typical underdog story that a lot of people can get behind. So the actual specific kaiju here is fantastic. I love just the general sort of shape and look of it, but also just the kind of stance that it's in. The fact that it's roaring here, and even the way that the tiny little itty bitty hands are sort of curled up, kind of looks like it's sort of scrunching its fists in anger and rage as it just roars out and screams, sort of thing. So I think just the way it's posed and it looks has a real sense of, it looks really alive and just sort of like energetic and real almost, So well done to him on that. But some of my other favorite little details on this is like the tail design. The way that sort of when it more connects to the body, it's these two separate strands of the very, very small Hero Factory bones and the slightly larger ones that he's attached the shell pieces onto. And then that second sort of smaller branch of the very tiny CCBS bone pieces branches off into that larger tooth piece that we've seen a few times in this episode now. And the fact that that piece naturally just sort of thins out and gets smaller like that, it really nicely transitions those two separate sort of structures there into one. And it gives you this beautiful sense of the tail sort of growing larger and then thinning out at the end there. Really like how that's done. I think it's just a beautiful little transition of pieces there. It looks phenomenal. And in general, the sort of curve of the tail and how it sort of spirals off into that sort of, official sort of Lego sort of like tooth, tail, claw piece there. Looks great. Really just sort of nice progression there. Speaking of nice progression, the neck on this thing is awesome. Using the Hero Factory foot pieces from a bunch of different Hero Factory sets. Looks great. The fact that they just sort of naturally kind of, I guess, like, just sort of insert into one another. I don't know if that's more of a like friction connection or if he's maybe, oh well, no, there's naturally the holes in those feet that you can connect other things into, so he's probably just, I don't know, fed a flex tube through that or something, or just found some way of connecting them. But that looks so fantastic, the way those pieces flow one into the other there. It really does look like a great looking neck design. And also how he's inserted some of those claw pieces and those red teeth pieces in there just to kind of fill in some of the gaps there and really aid that overall transition. That looks, it's really, really well done. I love how that looks. And yeah, just in general, there's this thing is just beautiful. Again, using the Invasion from Below headpiece there with this beautiful sort of custom sort of toothy maw to accompany it. It's gorgeous. So I could talk about this a little bit more, but let's actually transition into the next mock. This is also by VelociJACKtor, and this is Shin Godzilla. So he even said in the description here, this is a remodel of his entry into the Bio Cup. So as you look through this, you might notice some very similar things to the last mock we just saw, because that's essentially what he's done. I always love the idea in mocking, and I spoke about it with Patrick Biggs in one of the older podcasts I did with him, the idea of not retiring a specific concept. Just because you've built one thing already doesn't mean you can't advance that more and learn more from it, or hey, maybe that concept isn't fully explored or done yet. So I love that he's taken essentially the kind of base frame of his original Kaiju that we saw before, and then reimagined it in a different color scheme, added some stuff to it, and actually I think really improved upon the design or advanced it further and seen ways that he could expand it more. I think that's just such a... I'm going to say it again because I think it's really important there. Like, if you've built something once, there's no reason you can't revamp it again, try it in a new way, or recreate it in a similar fashion, add stuff to it, or advance it further, because I think it'd be a great way to grow as a builder. Can you take something you've done before and make it better, and then make it better again, and then again, and just see for yourself how you can advance a concept even more and just continue to make it better, and not just make it better, make you a better builder. I don't know, I think that's really cool. So props to him for really continuing to explore something that he's done before that he already did really well and has now done even better. So let's dive into this one and see some of the stuff that he's advanced with, or some of the things he's changed, or just talk about some other stuff. So kind of more or less the same tail design there. He's included a few different sort of like spiky elements that sort of transition up the back as well, and it's very Godzilla-y. It looks really, really nice there. So I do like that inclusion, which is a little bit more fitting to this specific mock. The head design is, of course, very different, doesn't use any Invasion from Below pieces, but instead uses a whole bunch of sort of smaller elements there that sort of all fit together very nicely and form a very realistic-looking Godzilla head. And he uses those beautiful gear pieces as teeth, which is a technique we've seen in a few episodes recently, but it's very nice. It's a really, really nice-looking design, and something very sort of menacing and monster-like about it, so that's pretty cool. The neck design is the same thing we saw before, but he's used a different type of tooth element here, one that's a little bit larger. And actually, I quite like that. The fact that it is a bit larger sort of fills in that gap even more, and just sort of, really makes those pieces flow one into the other even better. So that's really nice to see. I also quite enjoy the subtle hints of dark red on this, whether it's on the torso, on the spikes, the little tip on the tail there, or my favorite bit, which is on the feet, which is using some of those Baraki pieces that were on the red Baraki Kalma. Looks great. Just that little subtle hint of dark red really just sort of makes this mock pop a little bit more. It's really, really cool. And also the little toe design there looks absolutely fantastic. And I forgot to mention it before, the inclusion once again of that Onoa torso piece, which we saw on the last one there as well. That's really cool. And that's a great way of really recreating a sort of really beefy, strong-looking thigh design on a creature here. And also just nice to use that piece because it's kind of difficult to use because it is just so massive. So I always like seeing when people use that because, it works perfectly here and sort of flows with the rest of the textures and really does make that leg look pretty accurate to how Godzilla kind of actually looks. So, yeah. Lots to love about this one here. And again, just awesome. Looks so cool. And there's a pretty good recreation of Godzilla. So, yeah, really, really well done. That's it for this Kaiju-inspired episode of the Bionicle Inspiration series today. I hope you very much enjoyed. And hey, if you are looking to build a Kaiju, by all means, hopefully this has inspired you. And also, by all means, don't be afraid to send me a link to what you built. Because, hey, if this episode did inspire you, I'd love to see the stuff that you made. Do not be afraid to send it over. I'll happily take a look and let you know my thoughts. Additionally, in the description below is the submission email. So if you want to submit your stuff to be on the show, that's the way to do so. But if you want to just show me your stuff and you don't want it on the show, just reach out to me on social media and I'll look at it that way. But I only accept submissions through the submission email. If you send it to me another way, I'm just going to tell you to send it to me through the email. Please, it's just nice to have it all in one place. It's the best way for me to put it into an episode so that I don't have to be searching in 7 different places every day. So yeah, that's that. Additionally, in the description below are links to all the mocks that you saw in today's episode, so be sure to check those out and let the builders who built these mocks know just how much you liked them and give them some love. Why not give them a comment or a favorite or whatever on Flickr and let them know that you appreciate what they made. Additionally, in the description is links to my own social media, so if you want to see the stuff that I've got going on over there, that's the place to check out. Otherwise, that's it. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now, and happy building.